So, why detoxification? It's basically just the way, we have to eliminate toxins and poisons from our bodies, right? And everything in life is in a constant process of building up ourselves and breaking ourselves down, right? It's the basic concept of anabolic versus catabolic processes. And just like everything we talk about in neurology or we talk about in metabolism, everything's got to be in balance, right? We don't want to go, too much. If anabolism is good because it builds us up, well, catabolism is just as good, because if we build up too much, we'll just become a big marshmallow or something. So we have to be able to counter whatever balancing act we're doing with the opposite. And so in this case, we've got to break down as much as we build up. And so one of the things I like to talk about is the idea that when we're metabolizing things, it's not just metabolizing physical materials. We talk about that a lot, but it's really metabolizing the life experience. And the life experience includes everything that we breathe, everything that we take in, the things that touch our skin, and it also includes our emotional experience, the things that we process, the things that we read. I know Kenneth mentioned, media toxicity and how important that is. And, in our culture today, we don't really think about just how important the emotions are in driving our disease processes or our well-being, for that matter. But in Chinese medicine, when you go and you look back at the way that the doctors treated people, emotions were the first place they looked. And it's just like every disease process you learn as you're a student studying to become a doctor of Chinese medicine, it's always emotions. And they talk about which kind of emotions. And every organ network is associated with kinds of emotions. And just like a chemical compound has to be broken down, it's got to be taken from its larger structure into something smaller so that it can finally be, if it's a digestive process, it's got to be taken down to small enough pieces that it can be absorbed and assimilated into our bodies. And so the same thing goes with emotions. You've got to get those emotions into small enough pieces that you can understand them, absorb them, assimilate them into your emotional body, and then make them a part of you and be able to move on. And ultimately, we eliminate the part that we don't use, the part that we don't need, and that's important with emotions as well. And the reason I say this is because if we aren't emotionally metabolizing our experience, then we're going to get backed up physically. Physical channels and pathways will literally back up based on our emotions. Emotions drive physiology, and physiology affects emotions. So I just want to say that is so very important. And so one of the first concepts that's really important, and if you haven't heard this word yet, definitely get on board, hormesis. And it doesn't imply the word hormone. What it's relating to is the process by which the body gets better and better and learns how to adapt to its environment by learning. And it's sort of like going to the gym and exercising and building a muscle. You can go and you can build, you could work on one part of your body, you could build that muscle up. And that muscle is going to build up based on the interactions having with the environment. The environment's saying, here's a heavy weight, lift it. And if you start lifting a heavy weight, the body says, well, I need to put a muscle there to start lifting that heavy weight. The same thing goes for just about everything that we do, just about every process that we have in our bodies. So hormesis is the idea that little bits of toxins in small amounts are actually very helpful. They basically tune our bodies to be able to handle those toxins. We have a very elaborate system for dealing with radiation. We're always faced with radiation every day, coming from the kind of the universe, the galactic rays that are coming in. They're gamma rays coming off of the Earth. So we always have to face a little bit of radiation. The sun is giving us radiation. So we have a very beautiful mechanism for handling that, mostly around glutathione. And a little bit of radiation tunes us in being able to detoxify radiation. But too much radiation overcomes our ability to detoxify it, and it becomes damaging. So hormesis is where the toxin is just below the level of where it's damaging, and it's actually strengthening you. It's sort of like the people that you see that kind of like they're like the canary in your community. They're always detoxifying. They're always doing the next diet. They're always doing smoothies and green foods and taking baths and things. And they always have acne and they're always sensitive to everything. Sometimes I'm like, hey, let's go to the pub and have a beer. Okay? I can't really drink beer myself, but I love it. But it makes me just not do very well. But the idea being that a little bit of exposure actually does a lot for us. And it's that old adage of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And that we're finding out in the scientific research that this is absolutely true. So it strengthens us. So don't isolate yourself. Don't put yourself in a bubble. You know, that's a surefire way to not be able to live in the world. You'll just lose the ability. Your muscles, in terms of your pathways of metabolism and detoxification, will atrophy. Talked about emotions, the toxic environment, right? And the thing is that our toxins are becoming so ubiquitous now, and there's so many of them that they overwhelm our capacity to detoxify them. And it's unfortunate, you know, in the world of oncology and cancer, you know, some people are always looking for, why me? Why did I get cancer? You know, was it some exposure? And, you know, as Dr. Trasande said, you know, we don't know how many chemicals one person's being exposed to every day. It's tens of thousands. And each of us uniquely has a set of genes, you know, single nucleotide polymorphisms, pathways that make proteins that are enzymes that denature toxins for us. And some people do that really well with some of the toxins we're facing today, and some people unfortunately don't do it well. And it's not their fault, and it's not like you need to find the story about your ancestors and when, you know, the guy didn't give you the grain that, or your great-grandfather was supposed to trade some grain for something else, and he didn't make the trade and it was a bad deal and there's this karma there. Sure, that's a factor, but, you know, if two people were exposed to glyphosate every day for 10 years, you know, one person might get leukemia or lymphoma, the other person might not. And it's not necessarily their karma or their story. I like to think of it that there is the poem of our story, of our life, but we're all social casualties right now, suffering from the decisions being made by the highest level of our government and our decision-making to set laws and regulations, or don't set them and let industry and capitalism control, you know, our exposures and there are risk for cancer. So the big part is I want to get clear on is that part of what the toxins do is they inhibit our ability to just deal with the normal daily process of life. Like I said earlier, the cost of doing business in an oxygen-rich environment. We're dealing with oxygen in oxidative states all the time. It's just like having a furnace. I like to think of it as each one of our cells is like a house for little stars that are burning fuel in the presence of oxygen to create energy. And that process generates a lot of free radicals. And so when we look at some of the things that are associated with our body's own natural process, we have things like from Chinese medicine, like dampness and phlegm, a result of the sedentary lifestyle and the American diet, you know, things that generate a lot of the obesity and extra adipose tissue around the midsection that leads to, you know, all metabolic syndrome and diabetes and things. These are all major factors that are toxin generating. Faulty enzyme pathways. Enzymes do so much in our body. When they get broken down by toxins, we lose the ability to detoxify other things, and even the toxins themselves. We lose our quenching capacity. We can't quench free radicals. Our liver pathways get sluggish. We get qi and blood stagnation. I love that concept from Chinese medicine. It's so beautiful and so applicable. Qi and blood stagnation, the inability of energy and fluids to flow around the body effectively. Because how can you heal if you can't get the old blood out of an area to get new blood in? You can't. You have to move old blood out. This is where the whole Cleveland Clinic study on using heat versus ice on a trauma comes in. You have a trauma to an area of your body. You know, the classic thing has been RICE, right? Rest, ice, compression, elevation. Well, now we know that ice actually it shuts down the healing. We're so afraid of the pain and the swelling and the injury that we want to shut it down. So we freeze it. But what does that do? It constricts all the blood vessels and slows the flow of energy and qi and blood in and out of that area. So it literally slows the healing. So you can use ice in a trauma where there's really, you know, an intense situation, but you want to get back to heat and opening up the blood flow and creating immunological activity. And if there's some pain, you can modulate that with the herbs that we have, right? All kinds of things, for everything from curcumin to our feverfuse, to boswellia, to epigallocatechin gallate, to CBD, all kinds of things that can help. The lymph system gets blocked and our bowels get blocked, right? This is another big one. Just bowel function is really important for detoxification, and we start to have troubles with it when we get overloaded with toxins. So I talked about enzymes. Enzymes are so important. You know, we're basically enzyme generators. That's what we are. We're enzyme engines. All of our physiological processes depend on them. So toxins damage our enzymes. They displace minerals and disrupting our bone health. That's really important. These other mineral-related compounds that are synthetic disrupt the bones by actually replacing calcium and weakening our bones. damaging our organs, especially things like the kidney, the liver, and the gastrointestinal tract, right, where you have, actual detoxification processes that are being overwhelmed by toxins. Gene expression. I talked this morning about those tumor suppressor genes, right? Genes that actually oversee the transcription of our DNA, making sure that it's working appropriately. These toxins actually downregulate those genes. They're not able to function. They can't make their key proteins and enzymes that are there to say, hey, this cell has a mutation, let's shut it down. That system goes away. Damaging cell membranes. I talked about yesterday also the polarity between the internal and external environment of the cell. The exchange of information through the membrane is so important. And so membrane fluidity gets damaged, and we get this difficulty in cell communication. Hormones get disrupted, the way we use them, the way they affect receptors, the way they're metabolized. When estrogens from the environment come in as xenoestrogens, they literally disrupt our ability to metabolize our own estrogens, and we start getting all kinds of toxic metabolites that are very problematic. And then our detoxification itself gets impaired by toxins. So the more that we need our detoxification networks to work, when we burden ourselves with lots of toxins, we need it more, and it's actually working worse. We have a limit to what we can take. So here's the simplest model, right? Antioxidant, free radical. Your antioxidant is missing, your free radical is missing an electron in its outer shell. It's a chemistry concept. You have a valence shell. That's the shell of electrons in the outer part of the field. That's the part that interacts electromagnetically with other elements. And if it's imbalanced in its outer shell, if it's not connected to another atom sharing electrons, like let's say oxygen, for example, which only has 6 in its outer shell, 2 oxygens come together and they share the pair that they're missing. So they kind of stabilize themselves. That's why it's a diatomic molecule, O2. But when you have O2 that's missing an electron, when you have a hydroxyl radical that is missing 1 electron, then you have a space in that outer shell that's unfilled, that really wants to get filled. There's an electromagnetic pull by that atom for something else. And so that affinity for something else is the problem, because it'll overcome the bonds that are connecting a structure in our bodies together, because its desire, its electromagnetic pull to something else is stronger than the pull that's holding that structure together. So it breaks that structure. It can be your intima of your endothelial lining. It's a place we see a lot of oxidative damage, right? When you have free radicals inside our bloodstream, it breaks down the endothelium, and the endothelium starts to get scarred. Under that scar, the body tries to protect itself. You start to put low-density lipids in there, and you put all kinds of things like foam cells, and it starts to build up in a protective mechanism. But if it's a chronic insult, the problem is that you end up with a scar that starts forming and then releasing atherosclerotic plaques. That's how that whole thing goes. But it starts with a free radical. So just a little list of some of the things in the environment when I just think about it and pull out the things that come to mind for me. People always wonder about, is meat okay? Does meat cause cancer? Is meat a problem? Humans have eaten animals and whatever they could get a hold of forever, so we're okay with meat. It's just that there are lots of problems with meat. The way it's cared for, the way it's prepared, if it's injected with hormones, if it's grown on toxic fields, if the animals are just treated poorly. Is the meat overcooked? Is it barbecued? Is it burnt? There's so many reasons that meat can be bad. But really good meat that's been cared for, loved, humanely harvested, and then shared in a way that is sacrament, I think it can be a beautiful part of our human diet. But I don't need to go through this list. You're all pretty familiar with it. Carpets and floorings, clothes and glues, magic markers, paint. It's everywhere. It's everywhere all around us, and they're all coming together. And one of the points that Dr. Tresande made was all the studies are looking at one particular toxin. They look at one thing. Take a phthalate, for example. How does that work? Or a bisphenol. How does that work? How does it affect the physiology? But nobody's taken 10,000, put them together, and put them all in a soup and saw what that did. So that's what we're trying to figure out. How do we sort of reconcile what we don't know about that? So cellular metabolism. So I was talking about what happens inside our bodies, right? So cellular respiration, that's how we make energy, right? It's a very elegant and efficient system. It consists of the Krebs cycle, the citric acid cycle, that's fed by the glycolysis pathway that takes sugar, turns it into pyruvate. The pyruvate becomes acetyl coenzyme A, which drives the Krebs cycle. Then you've got the whole electron transport where you just drop the energy level of these molecules over time. That then leads to this thing called oxidative phosphorylation. And all along the way, you gather all this energy. You basically are taking energy and building it into structures called ATP, right? Adenosine triphosphate, 3 phosphate groups built onto the adenosine moiety. And that structure is a great place to store energy, because as soon as you need energy, you can break that bond and boom, there's all this energy. So that's a beautiful system that we use, but it costs us. It produces toxic oxygen radicals that damage our cells. So I use the analogy of a fireplace or of a furnace or of a wood stove, a simple analogy where you burn fuel, wood, in the presence of oxygen. So you need a good flow of air, right? You need wood that's not wet, so you need good fuel, which means not a lot of sugar, not a lot of dairy, and not a lot of just, junk. That'll clog up the system. But you need good oxygen flow too, so move. You've got to keep moving, right? Keep the blood flow. You got to don't be sedentary. Once those things happen, then your fuel production can work well. But then you also have to take care of the fact that this is a hot fire, and you want a hot fire. But that hot fire could be very damaging to the structures around it if you don't insulate it well. When I say insulate it, you need to quench the free radicals that are being generated. You've got to shut down the heat. You've got to cool it. So the first thing that comes off of that fire is the superoxide radical. It's an oxygen molecule that's just supercharged. It's very negatively charged, and it has the potential to damage the surrounding structures inside the mitochondria. So what do? We quench it. We make a molecule called superoxide dismutase, SOD. SOD quenches that oxygen radical right away in huge amounts, so very, very fast. But there's a step down to this heat, to this exhaust. And so we get hydrogen peroxide as another free radical that's generated after you've quenched that superoxide radical. And then you have to quench that, and you use glutathione to do that. In the first part of the cycle, the glycolysis cycle is pretty, it's that first part. Cancer is a good example of that system kind of gone awry. It's more like a fermentation process where you make lactic acid as a byproduct. So when we're trying to make energy in our bodies and we're using oxygen to make ATP, everything goes really well. We have very little exhaust. But as soon as you take away the oxygen, if you can't get enough oxygen to those tissues, then we have to shift over to an anaerobic metabolism. And that's an oxygen-free one, where we still need to get energy, but we don't have enough oxygen to run our normal system, so we run the lactic acid system, and that builds lactic acid as a byproduct. And lactic acid is that burning you feel in your muscles. It's burning. That's the lactic acid buildup. Cancer generates a ton of lactic acid. That's why we look at markers like lactic acid dehydrogenase in the blood that show us that cancer is doing a lot of glycolysis and making a lot of byproducts. And one thing we've been learning to work with more is bicarbonate. And bicarbonates are really great lactic acid sort of quenchers. They soak up lactic acid in the blood. And I do a lot of work with cancer patients where I'm trying to eliminate what we call chronic metabolic acidosis, where the body's kind of producing too much lactic acid over time. In cancer, it's a big factor, and you can start to get rid of that lactic acid with bicarbonates. I normally use a combination of a small amount of sodium and potassium bicarbonate. And you use that in the bloodstream not to change the pH of the blood, but to add buffering materials to the tissues. If you can build the buffering base, then there's a lot of buffer for the body to use to overcome its needs to make the blood pH normal. And the reason I say that is because there's a lot of people who think, we're going to change the pH of your blood. Well, you can't really do that. The blood needs to stay at 7.4. That's just where it's going to be. Tightly controlled mechanism. But we can change the urine pH, the urine output, and we can change the burden on the tissues, because if the tissues are being asked to provide the blood with a lot of bicarbonate, a lot of the salts, basically electrolytes, and the tissues don't have it, then you're going to have tissue deficiencies, and you're going to have muscle cramps, and you're going to have other tissue problems. So you got to supply the bicarbonate to take care of that. That's one of the exhaust problems. So some of the nutrients to enhance cellular metabolism. CoQ10, this is a very famous molecule, right? It's a big part of the Krebs cycle. It's a wonderful antioxidant. We get it in some meats and in seafoods. It's got a big role to play in energy production. It's in the mitochondria. It's in the membranes there, and it really drives that electron transport chain where we get a lot of the ATP molecules out of our energy generation system. So CoQ10 is really important for a lot of things. It also functions as a very powerful antioxidant. And it's in all kinds of human cells, and, we know that with statin drugs, one of the problems with blocking cholesterol metabolism is that some people get myopathies. They get muscle disorders because CoQ10 is a part of the muscle, it's building energy. So for some people, you block that energy pathway and they have problems, like cardiomyopathies, for example, where their heart doesn't function anymore. These are the kind of the smaller, rarer side effects of statins, but very serious ones. The rarity doesn't matter if you're the one who gets the condition from it. And so that's why CoQ10 was delivered with statins, because it improves energy transfer and it replaces the CoQ10 that's depleted by statin drugs. Carnitine is a fat shuttling compound. It helps move fatty acids through the mitochondrial membranes. That's really important because the mitochondrial membranes, the fluidity of the membranes and the exchange of information and of electromagnetic energy is how we really get the energy system working well. So carnitine is a shuttle to get the fatty acids, which is really a clean source of energy. There's a lot of interest in the ketogenic diet lately, right? Because part of it is that, hey, sugar's bad. Sugar's our stress hormone, or our stress fuel, and it goes like that. But in reality, the body has a very specific way of choosing when to use sugar, when to use fatty acids, or when to use amino acids to get energy. And it can get energy out of any of those fuels. It's just that fatty acids are used kind of in a little bit of slower term, and they're really easy to use for the body because you can just slice the fatty acids through this little beta oxidation process and create little pyruvate sections. And they run right into the Krebs cycle with no byproducts. So it's really nice that way, the fatty acids. But we don't want to just shift to a ketogenic diet. We want to still eat a whole food diet and let the body do its job. It knows how to, regulate which pathways to use when. Alpha-lipoic acid recycles glutathione. It's an indirect antioxidant, great for stabilizing blood sugar, great for neurological conditions. You can dose it anywhere between 1 and 600 milligrams BID, depending on the person's needs. Creatine magnesium chelate. I really like how magnesium and creatine work together as cofactors. Creatine is another big muscle energy generator, part of the phosphocreatine cycle. Magnesium. Every time I talk, I think it's you just got to talk about magnesium. It's involved in, over 300 known enzymatic reactions. It's a cofactor for so many enzymes and transformations in the body. Don't let yourself or your patients be deficient in magnesium. It's a simple thing we can fix. Glutamine, we've talked a lot about, like this morning. There's a lot of questions around glutamine. Glutamine is great. We make it. We eat it. It's a good thing for us. There's just the one or two instances where we just want to be careful when we're giving it as a supplement. The one is in cancer, with active cancer that's not being treated with oncological therapies, and the other one is with, kind of bipolar disorders, manic, depressive type of conditions where it could be converted into glutamate and be excitatory to neurons. And then omega-3 fatty acids. So the liver, of course, everybody thinks about detox, they think about the liver, and I'll say that, yes, the liver is amazingly important, for sure. Our entire blood supply passes through it, all day, many, many times. It's like 500 or so more functions that the liver has. And it filters out bacteria, enzymes, it makes enzymes for digestion and metabolism, and it really does a lot of the work of getting rid of harmful toxins. And one of the things it does is it makes bile, it makes bilirubin, actually, that then is concentrated into bile. Bilirubin is actually made from biliveridin, which is coming from the spleen when the spleen breaks down our red blood cells, when they're senescent. They live for 4 months, then the spleen breaks them down, and they're broken down, and the biliveridin is taken from the hemoglobin. It gets brought back to the liver, turned into bilirubin, which is a great place to sink all of our conjugated toxins that are ready to get excreted from the body. That's one of the main routes we're going to get rid of toxins, is through the bile, through the liver. And the liver is known to have this 3-phase hepatic detoxification, right? Phase 1, 2, and 3 we've talked a lot about. But I just want to make sure that we understand that it's not just the liver, it's in every cell in our bodies is undergoing that full 2-phase, phase 1 and phase 2, enzyme detoxification of toxins. Cellular detoxification. And the liver is also a source of a lot of emotion. And so when we're emotionally backed up, the kind of, the emotion in Chinese medicine, the liver is anger and frustration, irritability, not able to express yourself, which is what's so important. One of the things you can help so many people with is just, do you have a way to get your expression out to the world? Do you play an instrument? Do you have an art that you do? Do you like to run? Do you work out? Do you climb the rocks and walls? What do you do to just go, this is me? Because if you don't do that, it's really gets stagnant. It's hard to to process everything. You need a way to move it through, and the liver really depends on it. It's all about open, free energy, moving blood to the extremities. It's all about the free flow of energy and creative, benevolent process and expression. That's the liver. And it's the wood element. It's like the watershed, literally, like the watershed. All those big, the hepatic portal vein flowing into these big networks of blood vessels, they're just flowing through the whole liver. And I feel like it's like the watershed where all this exchange happens, between all the different parts of nature. So how do we support bile formation and flow? Well, here's a few things for you, a little list. Taurine, it's a wonderful nutrient that kind of, it's an amino acid. It's great for the kidneys, good for renal function. It's good for lowering hypertension. It's good for supporting bile formation. Vitamin C, which has so many beautiful, effects in the body, including helping bile formation. Betaine from beets, trimethylglycine it's called. It's also a good methylation agent. Lecithin, phosphatidylcholine, that's, like the egg yolk is very rich in lecithin. That's why you don't overcook your eggs, right? You keep the yolks runny so you don't break the lecithin and make the cholesterol not absorbable. The lecithin helps you absorb the cholesterol. Say that again? What do you mean, say that again? Sunny side up. Absolutely. Love it. Or poached or soft boiled. Methionine. And remember, when you're frying things, you fry at a low temperature, or you flash fry something quickly, and you don't fry with polyunsaturated fats, right? No olive oil in the pan. Don't put the really nice oils. You put those on at the end, raw. Use the, saturated fats, butter, ghee, coconut oil. Those are good things to cook with if you're going to be doing the high temperature in the pan. Methionine is, comes from meat. Comes from a lot of things, but it's the source of a lot of our proteins, our RNA and our DNA, our structures. We build it from methionine. And methionine restriction, we'll talk about in fasting, is one of the ways we've kind of found out how we can influence aging and extend life through restricting the amount of food you take in, basically the amount of methionine, that protein. Again, there's always a give and take. There's always a cost with everything. Inositol, a lipotrophic factor, helps the liver digest fats, and L-carnitine I mentioned before, which also helps the bile flow. And bile flow is so important because we want to get those toxins out. We're going to talk about phase 1 and 2 detox and how those systems work, but then the important thing is once you've detoxed it, how do you get it out of the body? We're going to go over those routes really in detail, and I want to talk about all the different ways we can upregulate those. So Kenneth hit the CYP450 enzyme system this morning pretty hard. These are mainly oxidation reactions. They're basically oxidative. You have, like we said, most of these toxins coming in our body, and in our own bodies too, steroid hormones, reproductive hormones, things that are lipophilic, things that pass through the cell membranes freely. These are molecules that we have to break down, and the first step is to make them water soluble so that they can be acted on by our conjugation system and excreted through our kidneys, through our liver, through our skin, through our breath. These are the places we're going to get rid of them, but we have to get them water soluble first to work within our system. We're a 60% water entity, so we don't do as well with lipid materials. Harder to get rid of them. So the first step is that CYP450 enzyme system, and there's lots of different enzyme pathways. These are some of the most common ones that are most, notable today because in pharmacy, you see these are the places that most of the pharmaceutical drugs are metabolized, right? You see probably the biggest one there is the last one, CYP3A4. That's a pathway that most drugs are metabolized through. So they first go through CYP3A4. Some of them are metabolized into their excretable products, but a lot of them then have to go through a conjugation step, that next step to be conjugated so that they don't continue to be reactive. Because the problem with phase 1 and what happens is that if we overwhelm phase 1, meaning we put in too much material toxin that we can effectively deal with at the phase 2 level, phase 1 end products are called intermediary metabolites, and those intermediary metabolites can be even more damaging and oxidative than the original compound. So a lot of these things really need to be systematically moved through phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3, which is getting it out of the body. And if you overwhelm phase 2 by running too many things through phase 1 and you don't have the resources, you can get into a lot of trouble. And that's where a lot of us are. That's what's happening with a lot of the toxic load we have right now. So these are the conjugation pathways, phase 2. There's a lot of them, but I'm going to hit the main ones. Glutathione is pretty much the most ubiquitous antioxidant in our bodies. Things like heavy metals and pesticides and radiation. Glutathione is a key player in getting rid of all that stuff. Methylation, I talked about this a lot in terms of genetic transcription. It's very important to maintain gene transcription. We think about it a lot with MTHFR and folic acid, right? But there's a lot of methylators. There's a lot of things that are involved in methylation. And we're going to hit these on the next slide. Sulfation, adding sulfur groups to things. Glutathione is a sulfur-based molecule. And I think it's very interesting that our culture right now is suffering from a lot of sulfur sensitivity. A lot of people are having sulfur intolerance, and you can see it in their genetic reports. If you do, an Ancestry or a 23andMe report, you get their genes. Then you run that through a software program like MTHFR Support, Prometheus. There's a few more, but they'll basically break down the way that that person processes sulfur. And there's a number of pathways, CBS and SUOX, and those pathways can be disrupted. And they get disrupted by things in our environment and by, genetics, changes over lifetimes or in our lifetime, emotions. So you can help understand that. But we need sulfur to detoxify. It's very important. So it's odd that we would have such a sensitivity to this compound we need so much, but I think it's just, toxic overwhelm inducing changes. Glycation and acylation, acetylation and glucuronidation, these are all additional pathways. Acetylation is very, interesting as it relates to kind of like a simple example would be aspirin. Aspirin is acetylated salicylic acid, comes from white willow bark, right? Salicylic acid. And then it was acetylated by putting an acetyl group onto it to make it more absorbable, less hard on the stomach when it was isolated as a single compound. But what it ended up doing was it ended up becoming a slightly different molecule, and it have a different effect to where it will actually acetylate platelets. It'll actually take the platelets and it will offer the acetyl group to them, and then they no longer aggregate with other platelets. That's how aspirin inhibits cardiovascular problems to some degree. There's a lot of question around aspirin's validity in that role, but that's an acetylation reaction. And then glucuronidation. Glucuronidation is a very big part of detoxification, especially drugs, especially in chemotherapy. These are the UGT enzymes, and it's very ubiquitous and very important. A lot of things go through it, and there's a lot of places that we get glucuronic acid or glucaric acid in our diet. So here's how we can break these down a little bit. The methylators, folic acid, S-adenosylmethionine, SAMe, B12, magnesium. I mentioned betaine, trimethylglycine, or TMG. Pyridoxal 5-phosphate, that's a reduced form of B6. Choline, and that's, associated with acetylcholine, right, the neurotransmitter also, but choline itself is also a really good methylation agent. And so if people have high homocysteine levels, you see that, right? It's a part of the cardiovascular fire that's going on for this culture, part of the inflammatory process. Methionine is the key piece that drives the cycle that results in homocysteine, and then based on the epigenetics and the genetics of the person, they may have a tendency to have high homocysteine. So the most common place to go is to add folic acid to help reduce that. But I find that a lot of people today need more than folic acid. They need B12, folic acid, sometimes B6, trimethylglycine, choline, inositol. And when you kind of combine this as a group, you can get more people to get a homocysteine effect that's significant. Talk about sulfation. One of the key cofactors in sulfation is molybdenum, and people who have sulfur sensitivities often do really well to eat a little molybdenum with their meals. 100 or 200 micrograms of molybdenum does a nice job of helping. And you'll see if you look at the mapping of the SNPs around sulfur, you'll see that molybdenum is a key component to helping catalyze the conversion of sulfur so that you can get it out of the body, sulfur compounds. And if it doesn't work right, you end up with things like urea, like overproduction of ammonia and urea if you have problems in that area. And then people get headaches and they feel bad, right? That's part of the sulfur toxicity. And then acetylation, I talked about a little bit. And then glucuronidation, glucuronic acid produced in the liver, and it's supported by B vitamins, glycine, and magnesium. I don't know if we could say enough about magnesium. Question, front row.
If someone has chronically low uric acid, does that include that they might need Somali and don't sulfate very well and deal with toxins, or what?
The question is around uric acid. And there is a connection between glucuronidation and uric acid. That's where the, glucuronic and uric acid. The question is, do people have, if you have low uric acid, is that related to a sulfur metabolism problem? And I'm not really too sure on that, Oscar. I don't know if that is a direct correlation. I think that one of the things to remember about uric acid is that it's one of our most important antioxidants. It's really important. So it indicates there's an overwhelm of the oxidation system in the body, and we're not able to generate enough of that. But I don't know that it's coming from this area. If you know, let me know. Sorry.
Yeah. Do you know of any information that relates MSM to methylation and sulfation in this regard?
Methylation, MSM, and sulfate, or and methylation. So methylsulfonal, it's definitely a methylator, and it donates a methyl group. It also donates sulfur, and it's considered more of a sulfur donor than a methyl group donor. MSM and chondroitin and glucosamine are generally sulfur donors that they donate sulfur to the joint capsules, to the synovium that helps our joints a lot. But I don't know of it as a methylator. Sorry, let me keep moving on here. Hold your question. So I want to talk about phase 3, because we talked about phase 1 and 2, those very kind of chemical processes, but phase 3 is the way we get those conjugated metabolites out of the body. And that's really important. How are we going to do that? And so there's lots of different ways to do it. The main way we're going to do it is use our bile, like I talked about, and bile is going to go out through the bowels, right? And then we've got our urine, which is going to be processed through our kidneys, a major detox organ, into the bladder, out through the urethra, and then we're going to have sweat through the skin, I didn't put up here, but also breath. Our lungs are another major organ of detoxification. So we're getting the toxins out through our bodies of all of our elimination routes. And so we have techniques like coffee enemas, colonic irrigation, gallbladder flushing, ionic foot baths, saunas, hyperthermia, skin brushing, high fiber supplements, all the things that we think about for detox. And I want to talk about those more specifically as we go forward here. So here's just a quick map of those 3 phases. Molecular breakdown in phase 1, oxidation, making things water soluble. Phase 2, you conjugate, neutralize the reactivity of the toxins, get them ready for transport out of the body, stools, urine, sweat. And phase 3, move toxin into the bile, release into the duodenum through the colon or to the renal network to get excreted through the urine, and open the pores to release sweat. These are all avenues for excretion. This is our basic overview, the simple vision of what we're talking about. Here's just another look at kind of like in the middle here, you see these intermediary metabolites. These are the problems because here we have these are the reactions that come in, mostly oxidative, generating free radicals. Free radicals lead to tissue damage. Hopefully we can keep up with the production of intermediary metabolites by doing these reactions in phase 2 to create excretory derivatives that are water soluble and go through our phase 3 to get out of the body. Does that make sense to everybody? Is that pretty clear and easy? Cool. So this is, we have our antioxidants here, A, C, and E, selenium, copper, zinc, manganese, coenzyme Q10 we talked about, all the sulfur-rich foods, right, the thiols. Again, how interesting that we have a lot of sulfur sensitivity, and yet look at how important they are for getting rid of these reactive oxygen intermediates. So what are our elimination strategies for phase 3? Well, we have binders and absorbents, right, adsorbents. They adsorb materials, electromagnetically pull things to them. Clay and charcoal. Stimulation of the hepatobiliary tracts. That's how we're making bile. Coffee enemas. Gallbladder flushes. Of course, gallbladder herbs that induce, biliary action, that help the cholagogue herbs. Bowel elimination. Getting the bowels flowing better. Of course, we have great herbal formulas for doing that and adjusting each person's constitutional bowel issues with our herbs using fiber and water. Any surgeon is going to give you, hey, fiber and water. That's how you clear your bowels out. Colonic irrigation. I want to talk about that. Surface elimination, hyperthermia, increase the heat of the body, open up the pores, Epsom salt baths, saunas, and diaphoresis. We have a lot of great herbs that induce diaphoresis, that open the pores and help us vent. The concept in Chinese medicine is venting out the toxins. Skin brushing, another way to just kind of open up that outer layer, because that top layer of skin cells is mostly dead, right? It's mostly keratin. We clear that off, and then we have exposed those layers below that are still functioning and opening and releasing things. Lymph massage, there's just a major school of thought now around how you can help to promote lymph drainage. And then ionic foot baths. I want to talk about that too. So let's hit clay and charcoal. It doesn't look like this in yours, right? Good. So both clay and charcoal are useful for adsorbing toxins in the gut, right? They're not absorbed. They're just moving through the gut. And then they're passing by. And in passing by, they have a lot of things stick to them. They're sticky. electromagnetically sticky. What's the best water filter you can use? Charcoal, solid carbon, right? It's really great. It connects to all kinds of things electromagnetically. It's kind of like putting a solid carbon filter in your digestive tract and filtering out stuff. It's really nice.
I know its origin in hot blows often they poison themselves.
For getting rid of poison, charcoal as well. Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. It binds up toxins, but it also binds up microbes, right? Good ones and bad ones. It also binds up nutrients. So you can't take it all the time. You don't take it with a meal, right? Don't take it with your supplements. The activated charcoal that we mostly use is a replacement for, kind of older, just like using ash, right? Use charcoal. That would have worked as well. But now we have activated charcoal, which has been processed to expand the surface area. So there's more surface to come in contact with the things that you want to adsorb. Here's a dose, 500 to 600 milligrams BID. That's a pretty good dose. 500 milligram capsule twice a day. You can do 2 of those, depending on the person's issues. People with long-term diarrhea with E. coli, it's always a part of my protocols. People that just, part of the phase 3 detox, if people are doing a heavy phase 1 and 2 focused detox to get rid of heavy metals or pesticides or you name it, we've got to get that phase 3 going or we're going to miss it. We're going to miss the detoxification process. So we use these things to help. And then clay, bentonite clay is the most simple thing. It's such a wonderful supplement. And it's great for diarrhea too. Like for an imbalance in the bowels where you just have your gut's really off and you have diarrhea. Man, I just put a tablespoon of psyllium seeds plus a teaspoon of clay in a glass of water, let it sit for about 8 or 10 minutes, boom, drink it down. I'll tell you, I've never had anything be so directly just curative for something so simple, just for a GI diarrhea issue like that. It works really well. But when you're using this with people, for whatever reason, you got to watch out because some people will really get bound up really quickly. So that's why I put that range of dosing. Start with a little lower and build it up for some people because you still want to be eliminating. If you start shutting down their bowels because you're binding everything up, you're doing them a disservice. So let's talk about enemas. The basic thing is water enemas, right? How do we get the bowel moving? I'll open the bowels, put water inside, make everything moist, and then it flows out. It's very simple, works really well. And I like the enemas because they're not like a colonic irrigation. They're just, kind of clearing things out with water and not going too deep into the colon. Remember that 70% of your microbes in your body, of which there are 10 times the amount of DNA of microbes as there are you in your bodies, 70% of those microbes, the weight of them is in your colon. And the majority of the colonic microbes are bifidus species. So retention enemas are enemas that you actually take. You hold them in the rectum for a while. Try to hold them for, 15 minutes, half an hour, whatever you can. When I was in China doing my internship at the International College in Nanjing, I spent a lot of time in this house of celebrity doctors, and it was just these great world-class doctors. I spent 6 weeks there, and I would just day after day, patient to patient. And this one GI doctor would do a lot of these enemas, and they would produce the decoction at the pharmacy there in the hospital, and then they would have a bottle with a little lip on it, a little mouth that was made for easy entry, and they have a person just get them up on the table, put a couple towels under their hip, and shift them to the side, and they would just insert it, and just let it sit there, and they let the bottle just drain into their rectum, and they just kind of open up and relax and let it sit there. And they would take their herbal formula that way. So that's what I mentioned here. You have local terrain modulation where you're putting the enema right into the colon. Or if you have colitis, you have, irritable bowel, you have, inflammatory bowel disease, it's great to get herbs in there. You want to get coptis and rhubarb and scutellaria and, philodendron, things in there that you want to see help the tissue and kill off the bad microbes and help the immune system. They'll do that locally, but there's also mesenteric absorption that's happening. You're going to take those herbs up into the bloodstream. They're going to come up through the liver as well and go through the body. I love herbal formula enemas. It's really beautiful. Coffee enemas are also really wonderful because they induce the gallbladder to dilatate. They actually expand the bile duct and they open up the flow of bile. So imagine if you can do something that opens the biliary tracts and moves bile out of the gallbladder to get it so that, you have the sphincter of Oddi, which connects to the duodenum, which connects to the common bile duct, which links to the gallbladder, which links up to the liver and all the biliary tracts. You're basically just flowing that out. You're opening that up and getting things to move. That's why coffee enemas are so cool, because when you take up the coffee, the oil from those roasted beans starts to get the gallbladder going. It's very stimulating, something with the whole process, all the different methylated xanthines and things in there. But it's like a pump to get the toxins out of your body. Great in cancer patients undergoing chemotherapy, and all kinds of different damaging and difficult therapies. Coffee enemas are great. And people also often wonder, is it going to be really harsh on me? Well, it's not really that harsh. I'm amazed at how many people, obviously if you've got, rectal problems, if you've got a bleeding rectum, or you got things like that, you got to be careful. But for a person who has a problem in another area and needs to detoxify, it's great support. Colonic irrigation I wanted to mention because it's gotten a lot of kind of, hype, and people love colonic irrigation. But I'll tell you that I'm not a big fan. We build our microbiome and our microbiota networks over our entire lifetimes, and what makes us strong is diversity. And these microbes establish themselves not as little individual planktonic organisms. No, they establish themselves in biofilms, cities, networks that are nestled into our mucus layers, that interact with our cells inside the lumen of our intestine, interact with our immune system. Our immune cells shepherd those little animals and keep them all in their pens and try to control them to make it work for us. So it's a sharing experience. So when you flush that heavy dose of colonic irrigation all the way up to the ileocecal valve, man, you're just kind of cleaning everything out. It's like, hey, the squeaky clean. Like, squeaky clean? The cleanest thing I know of is the dirt, I want to eat the dirt. That's how you get healthy. Roll around in the dirt. You ever see those videos of the, kids in Africa rolling around eating sticks and eating? Those kids are the healthiest kids. They have the most diverse network of microbes in their bodies. So be careful with colonic irrigation. I think that in some cases you could just kind of clear everything out, but don't keep doing it. You want to establish a network of microbes that is very beneficial to you and is strong and stable. Probiotic. Do you guys have any questions about colonic irrigation? Anybody want to challenge me on that? Please? No? Yeah.
The one before.
Billy Root.
The popular
biliary dilatation.
Surgery for 30, 40-year-olds right now is the gallbladder removal.
Yeah.
And so what happens to those processes without the gallbladder?
It's just slowed down. It's just a drip, drip, drip out of the liver. You don't have a sphincter there. You don't have the sphincter of Oddi might even still be there, but the gallbladder's not there. So you don't get to concentrate the bile. The liver just keeps dripping out through the biliary duct.
Still happening.
Yep.
Still happening.
It's just not the same. You don't get that like that concentration and then like the regular kind of bursts. You get this dripping drip all the time. So you have to be more careful, All the things that you do to help yourself when you've removed your gallbladder, those are the things you want to do now to prevent having to remove your gallbladder.
Right.
It's the same. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
I got a lot of questions. Keep going. I'm going to keep going. Thanks, guys. So let's talk about saunas. Near-infrared saunas, far-infrared saunas, Finnish traditional saunas. So near-infrared, right? 40% of the solar radiation reaching the Earth's surface is near-infrared. Well, we talked about with as Kenneth mentioned today, one of the great examples of how important near-infrared and radiation and really solar radiation is for detox is taking the newborn babies that have jaundice and putting them in the sun, and then they metabolize the bile just when the sunlight hits their bodies. So near infrared obviously is very helpful, and it heals wounds more quickly, induces angiogenesis. So it is a really helpful thing. Far infrared is a little bit different. It's a little bit of a deeper kind of penetrating infrared spectrum, longer wave frequency of non-visible radiation that also is very helpful in healing. It's thought to be a little bit of a deeper penetrating kind of a therapy. And, I've mused on this quite a bit because people, there's a lot of people selling infrared saunas and they have their own perspective, and there's people selling far infrared saunas, and then there's, kind of the traditional people. And I'm really more of a traditional person. I really like the kind of organic, like, let's get the body sweating. And, people are like, hey, you don't have to sweat. You can be comfortable. You can just sit in this thing and it'll just radiate and you'll start doing detox. I'm like, well, that's cool, but we don't need to always be comfortable. Just because I hurt myself, I don't want to make pain go away. That's not the most important thing. I do want to reduce pain and I want to help myself, but I want to push my comfort level. I don't think that being super comfortable all the time is healthy for the human body. I think we need to challenge ourselves. So I like to push the body, push my mind a little bit. I want to sweat. I want to get hot and be like, oh man, I'm hot and I'm comfortable. Have you ever gone through the process of trying to not get a cold or flu? You guys know the best way to do that is you take diaphoretics and you get into a hot bath and you do like Epsom salts or whatever, mustard bath, and you just sweat hard. Like, I haven't been sick in years. But not because I have some special immune system, but because I know the first sign of when I'm getting sick, and I know how to get myself sweating and how to vent off those pathogens right away. Works like a charm. But that whole process is so effective and so powerful that I don't know why we need to go to all these other areas unless people are, are a little more weak and deficient. And that's where we start talking about when do you detox, when is someone deficient, and when is someone not. Because you don't want to detoxify, deplete a person that's already really depleted. So then sometimes far infrared can be a little bit more mild. A near infrared has its issues. You got to be like close up to it, really close for it to work. So you've got to be right up against these, like you can see these. You got to sit right in there, and the beams are just like bing, hitting your body, and it works. But that's not my style. But I don't have anything against it. I just think that we're going to do great with the Finnish traditional sauna style. And then one thing is that there's EMFs associated with the kind of radiation. You basically your toaster is making infrared rays all the time. Microwaves are very similar. So, I like heat. I like rocks and earth and fire and things like that. So I mentioned fasting earlier, and one of the things about fasting is that we know now that it's one of the only things that we've seen that actually increases lifespan in mammals is restricting dietary intake. And that was a Chinese kind of thing too. Like, you kind of associate your length of your life with kind of like how much you eat. Like if you eat a whole lot more, you can probably rest assured you're not going to live as long as if you had eaten less. We're finding this to prove out in science. Juice fasts are very interesting. They can kind of reduce, our load of proteins. They can give the body a chance to detoxify. But again, they can be a little hard on a patient who is already very weak and deficient. So juice fasts, I like them as a part of detoxification programs, but again, I kind of use them specifically, and I don't use like beets and carrots and apples. I use like cilantro and parsley and celery as a base. I like lemons and limes. I like ginger and turmeric. I like things that, even like romaine lettuce and kale, things that are green and not full of sugars, because when you strip away the lignans and the fibers from a vegetable like a carrot, you're left with a lot of sugar. So just be careful when you're doing juice fast not to get a lot of sugar, especially if people have cancer. Water fasts have a long history of use. We go back to the very religious and spiritual aspect of water fasts, right? It's a very deep cleansing of the emotional body to go to a place where you don't eat and you just live in that space and feel what it's like to be empty. And what's really beautiful is that in that process, you do go through this thing called ketosis, which, we've been kind of the whole ketogenic diet tries to promote ketosis as a way to, overcome disease and in some ways to lose weight. I don't think it's the healthiest way to lose weight, and I don't think it's the best way to, enhance your anabolic performance or athletic performance. But it does have a lot of great applications, like I said earlier, for glioblastomas, some cancers, and also for epilepsy. It's really great. But ketosis occurs when we run out of sugar. We start burning fats and more fats, and then we have a buildup of ketones. And the ketones lead to a little bit of a very, very mild toxicity that we call ketosis. The extreme form of that is when you have a diabetic that has super high blood sugars and is making tons of ketones, and they go into ketoacidosis, and that's life-threatening. That's a very different thing than ketosis. But water fasts are very, very powerful, and I love to have people do a water fast a week, especially when they have cancer or something like that. It resets the body. It's like clearing out the old stuff. It's like, man, we just need a reset. And for a lot of folks, when I'm doing dietary recommendations and dietary kind of rehab, I always go to reset, which means I'm not changing your diet for your whole life. We're going to just start with taking out all the insults, the wheat, dairy, corn, soy, nuts, seeds, oats, chips, popcorn, caffeine, cocoa, alcohol, nicotine, cannabis. Pull it all out. Right? For just a little while. Just pull it out for 3 weeks. Maybe 3 weeks is great, and then you start to bring things back in. But I love the idea of a reset, and fasts are a really good reset. And the key thing about fasting, whether it's intermittent fasting, fasting on alternate days, prolonged fasting that can be, really powerful, but can also be hard and can be catabolic, especially for people that are weak, is that it induces this stuff called autophagy. And autophagy is so cool. I love it. It's this process by which we go through and we basically get rid of all the old used parts of our cells. The cells that are dysfunctional, we start to get rid of them. The neurological components that are broken down, we get rid of them. Parts of organelles in cells that are dysfunctional, we get rid of them. And it's a lysosomal degradation where we take these lysosomes that lyse up the materials and get rid of them and then put them out, get them out of the body, get them out of our cells. It's really beautiful. And the main thing we've found to do this is fasting. How do you clean out your basement? Get rid of all the stuff that you have hanging around that's slowing down your life. Clear it all out, and then you can move again. That's what fasting can do for us. And like Mary was saying this morning, Mary Rondeau, is that, intermittent fasting just means just not eating after dinner. Just stop snacking after dinner. That's all you need to do. You can induce autophagy right now. Just eat your dinner at 5 o'clock and don't eat until you break fast in the morning. You have your break fast, right? Once you break your fast in the morning, you're back on. But you eat in the morning, you eat between 9 and 5. That's it. Don't snack in the evening. You just did it. You just created intermittent fasting, you induced autophagy, and you just extended your life. That's it. It's that easy. It used to be thought that the brain was metabolically privileged, that they didn't think that this would happen in the brain, but actually fasting will also induce neuronal autophagy, which is the turnover of our neurological tissue, which is really important for brain plasticity, for maintaining cognition. Neurocognition is much enhanced with autophagy. So I want to talk about Chinese medicine perspective, right? Therapeutic principles, clear pathogenic factors, and tonify deficiencies. And so how do you understand if somebody is deficient or if they're in an excess state? There's a lot of different ways we can look at them. I think that Kenneth talked about, hey, you know what a good banana looks like? You know what a bad banana looks like? You know what a good apple looks like? You know what a bad apple looks like? That's how you kind of look at someone. You can tell, Well, to some degree you can. But, we also take the pulse in Chinese medicine. We look at people's tongues, and we ask them a lot of questions to kind of understand what's going on in their bodies, to help understand if they're excess or deficiency. And we really want to know this because if someone's very deficient, they're weak, they're pale, they're thin, they're wan, they have fatigue, it's not a great time to start detoxifying them and stripping away things from them. Even if they have a load of metals or something, the first thing you want to do is get them back full of life force. Get them charged up again. Let's build them up, and then they can detoxify. But detoxification takes life force. It takes essence. It takes a lot of our resources to do. And if you don't have the resources to start, stripping away what you have is not the plan that's going to work. And I've watched a lot of people go through these, detox programs. They just kind of take anybody that'll pay the money to do it, and they come out of there worse than they started. So just be aware of that. And with Chinese medicine, we have all these principles, Is it a hot condition, a cold condition? Is the person damp? Do they have phlegm? Are they, do they have qi and blood stagnation? Are they having pain? Is there wind? Do they have tics and tremors and muscle twitches? Do they have deficiencies of qi? Can you see that their body's sinking? Their muscles aren't lifting. They're falling down. They have a deficiency of blood. Are they pale? Are they thin? Are they dry? They have a deficiency of yin, even deeper dryness and hot flashes and night sweats and all kinds of things that go with yin deficiency, dried out tissues, kind of like that old pruning effect. Yang deficiencies. Do they not have the fire of life? Can they not digest things? Do they not have passion? Do they not have libido? Do they not have sexual function? Are they cold? Essence deficiency. Losing their teeth, like people who take methamphetamines, they just push their essence out really fast, their teeth fall out. You can just watch it. That's exactly how it happens. Preserve the essence. And then marrow, the bone marrow deficiencies, we see bone marrow deficiency manifest as, a lot of weakness, part of anemia, the anemia picture, the blood, essence, all that gets deficient. But so you want to understand how the person sits with regard to these principles. I always have to talk about essence because it's one of the best concepts ever out of Chinese medicine. It's kind of I think of it as the source of our anabolic activity. How do we make ourselves every day? We need essence. The steroid hormones, our corticosteroids. Without steroids, right, we can't put out fires in our body. We need inflammation to live, but if we can't control it, it gets out of control. And what does inflammation do? It drives our immune system. Where does autoimmunity come from? We're autoimmune because we didn't stop our immune system from going looking for stuff to eat. If we don't stop to look for something to eat, we eat ourselves. And if we eat ourselves, we shorten our lives. So we can influence this by supporting our essence. The essence will give us the energy we need to build the steroids, the corticosteroids, the mineralocorticoids that will, put out the fire, turn down the inflammation, immune system, stop, it's good, we got rid of the bugs, we're cool, let's stop it now. And then everything can chill out, and you can live a long, happy life. Reproductive hormones, DHEA, it's a precursor, and it's a neurosteroid. Very calming to the system, very, regenerative. Testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, those things are signaling molecules that are built by the body to tell itself to rebuild itself. But you gotta have the essence, you gotta have the spark and the material to make those hormones to direct your body to rebuild itself. If you don't, you will fall apart. Back to my example of the person, the methamphetamine addict, whose teeth are falling out, whose bones are weakening. They used up their essence too quickly. Enzyme networks, they're built out of essence. I talked about how important they are. And the bone marrow, a direct extension of essence. And what comes out of the bone marrow that's so important? Stem cells, right. All of our formed elements, right? Our platelets, our red blood cells, all our different white blood cells, you know. So let's start talking about some specifics. So glutathione, gamma-glutamyl glycine, is built of 3 molecules, right? Glycine, glutamine, and cysteine. It's the primary antioxidant in the body. I talked about how important it is for getting rid of all kinds of toxins. So you got to keep the right balance between oxidant production and antioxidant in the body, and glutathione and our systems and our networks that make it keep it perfectly in balance. And so most oxidative stress is a deficiency of glutathione. The main enzyme that drives our body to make glutathione in response to stresses, remember back to hormesis, we want a little bit of stress to tell our body, make those enzymes, build that stuff that quenches free radicals and gets rid of toxins. We need that to keep going. Here it is. This is NRF2 here inside the nucleus, protecting gene expression. Here it is here in the cytoplasm, getting rid of oxidative stress, protecting us from cancer. Without this NRF2 and this KEAP system driving the buildup of our antioxidant enzymes, we'd be in big, big trouble. Back to cancer and how important this is. So we're going to jump into some of the herbs and things. We're going to talk about NRF2 and specific things. I wanted you guys to have this list. This is just some of the most researched components of our botanical medicine toolbox that do a great job of inducing the body to make glutathione. And if you don't have the resources, meaning you don't have the building blocks, the glycine, the glutamine, and cysteine, you're not going to be able to build it because you don't have the materials. But if you have the materials and you don't have the enzymes, you can't put them together. So you got to have both. And I'll say one thing about glutathione is that people are always trying to find a way to induce, like to get it into the body. How do I give people glutathione? Can I take a pill? I'll inject it, you know, and all those, there are ways to get it in the body. Acetylglutathione can get in the body to some degree. Oral liposomal forms can get in through the mouth and bypass the liver metabolism and get into the body that way and bypass the gut. But they're not as good as just getting the body to do its job well, which means giving the herbs and the nutrients, controlling the diet, giving the building blocks, and inducing the exercise that it takes to make the system work. Phase 2 enhancing nutrients that are going to induce this, selenium, calcium D-glucarate. This one's hard to get enough of it in the body. But glucarate is part of that glucuronidation, you know, glucuronic acid we talked about. Ellagic acid, this is mainly from pomegranates. Pomegranates actually are the only plant that contain estrogen, and they happen to have ellagic acid with them, which actually is a great estrogen metabolizer and a detoxification supplement or molecule. Diindolylmethane, methane, isothiocyanates, sulfur-rich foods, alpha-lipoic acid, and N-acetylcysteine. So where do we get N-acetylcysteine? Well, the main source, the most abundant source is in whey protein. It can be dairy cows or it can be goats. It just needs to be from free range, cared for, loved animals that were never treated with anything that was nasty. And then you get this really great source of NAC. And like I said this morning, whey protein is really a byproduct of milk, dairy production. So most people throw it away. But it's actually this great protein that's really lactalbumins. It's not casein, which is the protein that's associated with dairy, and it's not lactose, which is the sugar. So most people don't react to whey, even if they're dairy sensitive. Antidote for cysteine and glutathione deficiency. Over 2/3 of 46 placebo-controlled clinical trials administering NAC have indicated beneficial effects of NAC as trial endpoints or as general measures of improvement in quality of life and well-being of the patients. So if you did nothing else, if you just did 1 to 2 grams a day of N-acetylcysteine, you're going to improve half people's lives. It's just like that's how simple. But we can do so much better, and a lot of people need a lot more than that. So glucosinolates are compounds found in the cruciferous vegetables. This one, picture of the broccoli sprouts. Glucoraphanin, this is an inert molecule that is precursor to sulforaphane. And sulforaphane is now a very well-known antioxidant that's an inducer of phase 2 enzymes. Very protective. And it's a reactive molecule, meaning it likes to grab onto oxidative molecules and quench them. It also likes to upregulate our phase 2 systems. It needs an enzyme called myrosinase to go with it to convert the glucoraphanin into sulforaphane. And that's normally happening for us in the gut. So when we eat them, the microbes act on it. They create the myrosinase enzyme, and they transform it into the sulforaphane for us, the isothiocyanate. And thio here is for sulfur, and sulfur is for sulfur. So are those sulfur-rich compounds that quench free radicals. How's everybody doing? Hanging in there? Good? Lunch is digesting? We're okay? Good. Okay, here's Dr. Paul Talalay. It's really cool. He did a lot of research at Johns Hopkins into sulforaphane and kind of was looking for ways to prevent cancer, and how do we really stop it before it started, because it's a lot easier to work in that realm than it is to get rid of it once it's there. Because cancer's stuff, it's hard. It's like a thing. It's not like you just go, I'm going to meditate until it's gone. I mean, I love that idea, but man, I've been in the trenches a lot, and it just doesn't quite go away like that. Not most of the time. But so preventing it is where we have a lot of, room to work. This guy did a lot of work, though, on just looking into the broccoli and broccoli seeds and sprouts. And originally it was broccoli, and then at some point they went to broccoli sprouts, and they found that they had higher amounts. They ran out of sprouts, so they were like, well, let's use the seeds. And they found the seeds had the highest amount of glucosinolates and isothiocyanates. So they started using the broccoli seed. So what does sulforaphane do? Normalizes phase 1. That's important, because don't let it go too fast, right? So it overpowers phase 2. And it induces phase 2. Protects the cells, prevents toxins from being activated, induces cellular repair pathways, induces glutathione levels, protects DNA from free radical damage, induces the transcription factor NRF2 that I just talked about. When you tell your kids, eat your broccoli, man, you got to really mean it. Because I'll tell you, one of the things that's come out in recent research is that it's actually more important that you eat good food than you don't eat bad food. Meaning that you can eat some bad food, and as long as you eat good food, you're better off than if you didn't eat good food at all. Eating good food is really important, and this is good food. Just a little breakdown of the actions, just how many systems it affects powerfully. Photoaging, immune modulation. And there's something about this whole immune thing, too. When the immune system gets driven, it shortens our life. It breaks us down. So it has to be in perfect balance. Everything's got to be just in that right balance of yin and yang. This is in your notes here, research that you can have. Just want to dig in on it yourself. Man, these thistles pop up all over the place in the, where we cut the land, just like St. John's Wort too. Like you cut a road into the forest and then bam, there's like thistles everywhere. And St. John's Wort, it's like repair. They're the repair plants. That's what they do. Milk thistle is a repair plant. It repairs, aspects of our detoxification network, inhibits damage of DNA. And there's a key compound, we always think of silymarin, but silymarin is really a molecular kind of soup that has a lot of silibinin in it, these flavolignans. And silibinin has got a lot of great research on it for doing these hepatoprotective things like stabilizing cell membranes, increasing glutathione production. It does a lot of great things for the liver and protecting it. So limiting fibrosis and preventing fibrosis. It's really important. There are some other herbs that are even better at regenerating liver tissue. It's not a regenerator of liver tissue, but it does prevent the fibrotic breakdown of liver and the cirrhosis. Protects the kidneys, chronic kidney disease. Milk thistle's up there for me in my list of great herbs for CKD, which is very rampant in the aging population. Anti-inflammatory activities also. NF-kappa beta, kind of big driver of inflammation, and COX-2. So how many ways can we control that inflammatory cascade that's all tied into this? Dandelion, love this. The springtime, so many dandelion plants in my backyard, and just walk on. Me and my daughter out there nibbling on them. It's really great. In Chinese medicine, this herb, we generally use it as the whole plant rather than just the root. I know in the Western model we use both. And the root has more of a biliary effect, and the whole plant has more of a diuretic effect. And in Chinese medicine, as you can see here, it's bitter and cold. So it really does clear heat, gets rid of some dampness, so clears damp heat a little bit, unblocks the painful urine, has a little bit of toxin clearing activities. So that whole plant is what I like to use for clearing out toxicity. But again, it's cold and bitter, so you want to balance it with the nature of the plant with other herbs in the person you're treating, right? You don't just go, I'm going to give everybody dandelion. It's useful in the context of the constitution of the patient. More cruciferous vegetables, diindolylmethane, that's the main source of this compound that I mentioned. Great for helping to detoxify estrogens, both xenoestrogens, the ones from the bisphenols, right? The ones that are coming in the form of chlorine and all these different pesticides and, polyaromatic hydrocarbons and heterocyclic amines, things that affect us negatively in the hormone realm. They all are going to be enhanced our detoxification by DIM, which is the bioactive form of indole 3-carbinol. And indole 3-carbinol had a lot of research coming out on it as a cruciferous vegetable molecule that was great for inducing phase 1 and 2 enzymes to enhance our ability to detoxify. One of the big things that it does is it induces this 2-hydroxylation of estrogens. And one of the tests that came out maybe 10, 15 years ago was the 2-to-16 hydroxylation ratio of estrogens in patients that you could look at, especially in women. You could take and look at where their estrogens are going in their metabolic pathway, and if because most of it's methylated or hydroxylated. And in the hydroxylated estrogens, if there's a hydroxyl radical that goes on at the 16 position, it's been associated with more proliferative conditions, more cancers. It's more induces the ductal epithelium to start growing a little bit more proliferatively than the 2-hydroxylation position, which is more protective and preventive of cancer.
Is there a difference between, let's say, the raw vegetable versus overcooked or something?
The raw vegetable is not very digestible. The overcooked vegetable denatures some of the key molecules. So just a light steam where you just got the vegetable to just start to open up and break down some of those fibers and lignans for us to be able to digest it. Great question. Protects against oxidative stress and free radical scavenging. So imagine you're putting all these things together, right? You're putting all these pieces together so that we can get, rid of these estrogen toxins, the xenoestrogens, and other xenobiotics. This plant comes up a lot, Scutellaria bicolensis. In Chinese medicine, it's a bitter and cold herb. It's one of the yellow herbs. It has these yellow principles, the flavonoids, the bicolin, and wogonin. Clears heat, dries dampness, and eliminates toxins. These are these herbs that are really great for clearing heat and drying dampness, eliminate toxins. And in the kind of more modern terms, it's anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, hepatoprotective. It's a cholagogue. It helps to move the bile through the liver. And it's diuretic. Helps to also move the detoxification pathways in the kidney. How beautiful that the overlay of these systems, how we see today, these terms, wrap up with the terms that we use in Chinese medicine. I love how it's very correlative. Nothing is direct, but there's a lot of overlay. Another one of these, it's a very similar herb, philodendron, Chinese herb that also very much like Scutellaria, but has a little bit more of an affinity for the lower part of the body, especially the kidneys and the bladder. So it's also clearing away a lot of the toxins, eliminating toxins from these different routes. And it's also cold and bitter, dries dampness. Another principle there, philodendrine and berberine. These are isoquinoline alkaloids that are very anti-inflammatory, anti-gout. It's great to put in a retention enema, a decoction, like I said before. The Scutellaria plus the philodendron plus some rhubarb, coptis, they can all be really helpful in that regard. Tribulus terrestre. So I'm going to move away from just like the dampness and, heat, toxin clearing herbs that we just looked at. And I'm going to look at some. This is a little bit more of an herb that has some tonifying effects, although in Chinese medicine, it's really a liver moving herb. It's called Bai Ji Li. And one of the little mnemonics I used in Chinese medicine was to, Bai Ji Li, freeze the liver qi. So it was like this nice little rhyming song that made it easy to remember. But it stimulates the flow of bile and breakdown of fats in the liver, detoxifies the kidney, helps rejuvenate kidney tissue, and it has this molecule called protodiacin in it, which has its anabolic effects because it's a precursor to DHEA formation. Protodiacin actually shifts into DHEA, which is really a beautiful thing about that plant. So if you're looking at, tribulus as a plant, try to find out if there's protodiacin in it, because that'll help you understand that it's the right stuff that you want. Great for low libido, impotence, and enhancing DHEA. And some of these plants that are more anabolic supportive, that's really important. Like I said, you gotta be anabolic to detox efficiently. You can't detox if you're weak and deficient. Let me see where we are here. Which slide am I on? Oh, good, we're getting there. So Panax ginseng, we haven't talked about this much in this conference, but this is probably one of my all-time favorite herbs. It gets a little bit of a bad name just because it's warming for some people, but it's not that warming for a lot of people. And you can use the white form if you don't use the Korean red form, but the Asian ginsengs are really wonderful in many, many ways. And again, they're kind of like chi tonics. And one of the things about ginseng from Chinese medicine perspective is that it accesses a place called the source chi. It's sort of like right where essence becomes what it's going to be in the body. It sort of accesses this point. And in the kind of Taoist thought, it's the only plant that does that. It was named Ren Shen, kind of man's root, because of its shape. It kind of looked like the man, and it was thought to contain the Jing, the essence, the Qi, and the spirit, the Shen, of the human, all in one root. It had this incredible revered quality, and still does. It's a primary adaptogen. It helps the body adapt to stress. It enters the spleen and kidney channels, so it's really great for tonifying your digestive system. That's the digestive spleen in Chinese medicine. Duodenum, pancreas, part of that biliary function, part of the stomach. Saponins and ginsenosides, so these are these soapy-like molecules that give ginseng a lot of its potency. And there's a lot of different ginsenosides in ginseng. Also, American ginseng has them, Noto ginseng has them, the Korean ginseng, the white ginseng, they all have these ginsenosides, and they're a big part of, again, making sure that it's potency. It's the medicine that you want. As long as there's good amounts of ginsenosides, it's going to work well. And you can take this plant every day for the rest of your life. It was the kind of thing that, once you hit 35 years old, most men should take ginseng. That was kind of a concept in Taoist thought. And it's because it's like an herb of longevity. It's going to help your body adapt to stress and supply you with the motivating energy, the chi, to do all the actions we need to do to rebuild yourself and to keep yourself free of toxins. These two molecules, we've talked about a lot of still beans, which are plant compounds that are, basically made by the plant as an adaptive response to the environment, right? They're there to prevent the plant from fungal infections and things like that. We've found that they have really powerful effects in our bodies. They're phytoalexins. That's that, they're basically plant protection molecules, adaptive phytochemistry. And the two plants, Polygonum cuspidatum is the richest source of resveratrol, and then Pterocarpus marsupium, the richest source of that's funny, I tried to correct this, the richest source of pterostilbene. So pterostilbene and resveratrol, these two molecules, have got incredible free radical scavenging activities, but they also do a lot of other things. Pterostilbene is one of the only compounds that's been shown to actually improve pancreatic beta islet cell function and help to regenerate them after they've been damaged by the autoimmune condition called type 1 diabetes. It's one of the only things that's been shown to do that. And then resveratrol and pterostilbene have all kinds of actions for regulating gene control. We talked about tumor suppressor genes, turning on P53, shutting down the proto-oncogenes like HER2 and some of the other BRAF and RAS genes that get upregulated in cancer. They're very, very powerful molecules, and using the whole plants is really key, but you can also enhance the plants by combining with resveratrol extracts, whether it's a 50% or a higher concentration. I put them in with the whole plant extracts and put them in a formula altogether. I always want the full matrix of a plant, not just the isolated molecule. That's just part of, holistic medicine. Mushrooms, what do? They clear and clarify. They clear dampness in Chinese medicine. They relieve turbidity. They're immune enhancers. Well, imagine how hard it is for the immune system to work and do its job of identifying self versus non-self if it's in a cloud of smoke. What's going on in here? I don't know. Mushrooms are really good at getting rid of the smoke. They're really good at getting rid of the turbidity in the system, clarifying. They're clarifiers in our ecosystems. They suck up toxins in the environment. They do that in our bodies as well. They're very powerful that way. Biological response modifiers. They also induce our enzymes like NRF2. They support the terpenes and the polysaccharide fractions together. Both are very supportive to detoxification, to immune function, to tissue strengthening, integrity. Lots of great things that they do. Here's a list of a few of the big ones that I really like. A question came up earlier about mushrooms. Where do you get them? Like I said, my sources are, mycelium and fruiting body. They're grown on their original media. I used the example of chaga, Inonotus obliquus, that grows on the birch tree, the Betula alba tree, and it concentrates something called betulinic acid. Well, if you don't grow it on the birch tree, it's not going to concentrate betulinic acid. So make sure it's grown on a birch tree and that you get part of that birch tree with it, and then you take that whole thing and you powder it and you decoct it in water, and then you get that and you do a little bit of an ethanol extraction to pull the rest of the terpenes out, and you've got everything you need from that plant, and it's going to be great medicine. So make sure that that's the kind of extract that you're getting when you're using mushrooms. You can also get the whole mushroom, chop it up, and boil it for a long period of time, and you'll irritate and agitate it, so all that stuff will go into the solution. Peony, this is a great liver softening herb. It softens the liver, nourishes the blood, astringes the yin. All those things, nourishing the blood and astringing the yin, are all part of that quenching network. Calming down the system, getting rid of those free radicals, moistening and nourishing tissues. Does a great job of doing that. And also it flows the liver energy and gets it moving, gets things moving out to the extremities. People with cold hands and cold feet, irritability, menstrual dysfunctions. Bai Shao, peony, white peony is just so great for all these things. These two compounds, pionol and pioniflorin, have been shown to have a lot of good antioxidant effects. And I talked yesterday about pioniflorin as an antispasmolytic. It doesn't do much on its own, but when you combine it with licorice, glycyrrhizin and pioniflorin work together to have profound antispasmolysis activity. So I talked about St. John's wort, one of my favorite detoxification plants of all time. You don't think of it this way. It's kind of like the neurological adaptogen par excellence. It's just so great for the nervous system. People with post-herpetic problems, herpes zoster, shingles. It's incredible for healing shingles, both topically and internally. It's incredible for depression and anxiety. It's so good for just for neurological dysfunction. It does a great job there. But one of the things we don't think about it at is that it is an incredible inducer of the liver enzyme pathways and the cellular detoxification networks. And it does that through something called the pregnane X receptor. And the pregnane X receptor is sort of like this sort of directing central station that decides where all the toxins are going to go and how to best get them out of the body by regulating them to the right channel, the right enzyme, CYP3A4, CYP1B2, CYP2D6. But it's got this oversight. And so St. John's wort is this amazing director of the detoxification system, and it's gotten to be a problem child in our world because it's so good at detoxifying things that it gets drugs out of our bodies. Most of them are toxic. They have a great purpose in emergency medicine, but for chronic care, we don't really want our people to be taking toxic things long term, but some people have to be managed and things like that. So St. John's wort has this role of getting rid of toxins, and a drug like irinotecan, which is a chemotherapeutic agent that, needs to be in the body for a certain amount of time to damage cells, was shown to be, the duration of its time in the body was reduced when it was taken simultaneously. Now, of course, we didn't actually evaluate how those people did. Did the people who took St. John's wort and irinotecan and got rid of the toxin faster over time, how was their overall survival? How was their progression for survival? We didn't get that. We just got the pharmacokinetic data. That's it. And then from there, we hypothesized that St. John's wort should never be used with irinotecan. The problem is we don't have funding and money to study the herbs like we do the drugs. Do you know what it costs to get a drug through phase 3 trials right now? Anybody got a guess? What'd you say? 3 million? I'd say you're probably 3 orders of magnitude below. $1.7 billion. Yeah, look it up. Do your research. I couldn't believe it. I was so stunned to realize how much it costs. So you wonder why, well, God, why don't you have any data about your herbs? I'm sorry, but I'm not going to make back $1.7 billion on studying ginseng. I don't know how I could grow enough ginseng to sell $18 billion worth to pay off the trial. It's not going to happen. So we have to shift our approach to doing research. It's just not working for we don't fit the model. Celery, love celery. I love celery juice. Celery juice is amazing. Just the whole celery, it's just phenomenal. But the seeds also are a really wonderful part of the plant. Arthritis and gout, great for the kidneys. Just helps that kidney function and eliminating uric acid. So again, we wouldn't push uric acid down like you asked. Also, it wouldn't get you deficient. It might actually help to regulate uric acid. The volatile oils, luteolin. There's so many great compounds. I just love this plant. Feel free to use it. It's great for people. Lymphagogues, poke, redroot, cleavers, myrrh. Man, frankincense and myrrh, what a great gift, right? They're so beautiful. And as blood movers in Chinese medicine, their big role was to kind of like get the blood out of the broken and damaged areas so that new blood can get in, so you can cure and heal those areas. It does that all over the body. And so it helps the lymph system move. When the lymph system's backed up, that immunological, backup creates a lot of toxicity that can't get out. And so we have to promote the lymph system. I talked about the lymph massage as a possible way to really get that going, to massage the lymph system and get the lymph to open up and move. You can do topicals, like Donnie's oil of anointment, which has the Boswellia sacra in it, and the, Phytolacca oil, and put that topically on the lymph areas, Some people around here have done that before. And there's just a lot we can do to get the lymph system moving. But probably the most important thing is just don't be sedentary. Back to that idea. Just move. Just move. Keep the body moving.
What about inhalation?
Inhalation.
Of frankincense and myrrh.
Like aromatherapy? Yeah, it's great. Totally works. Yep. Totally works. I would do it adjunctively. It's hard to get enough in there, but yeah, it's a great piece of it, Exactly. Jumping around, you just get a room, get the vaporizer going, start smelling the essential oils. Like, oh man, this is good. Woo! Haven't had any of these foods in a week. I'm feeling good. I kind of went through this list. Here's some liver-specific foods. It's just a list for you guys to have. So many good things for the liver. Basically it's like, go for bitter. The bitter principle is great for the liver. All the cholagogues, bitter is so good. If you're a sweet tooth, try to shift to a bitter tooth. Salt tooth, bitter tooth, those are kind of more the healthy ways. The sweet tooth can be a little problematic. Yes?
Could you elaborate a little bit on your previous list to put in nuts and seeds as one of the things to avoid? But I know that people talk about just for brain health and all that. Could you elaborate?
Yeah, she's asking about nuts and seeds and why they're on my list for the reset. And again, I'm not saying these foods are bad. This isn't like these foods are bad, these foods are good. This is more of a when I want to take somebody and say, hey, we're just going to get the system to totally calm down and just try to stop the inflammatory cycles, stop the immunological upregulation, get it calmed down, then we can kind of start over. Nuts and seeds fall into that for me. And the reason is because there's lots of reasons. For one thing, a lot of nuts they're just not processed well. You're not getting a bag of nuts from grandma's tree that you're taking the shell off of it and it's fresh and you're getting this really fresh, delicious nut. Most of them have come from some other part of the world. They've been in a bag, they were in a truck, they were in a plane, they were in a thing, they've been oxidized. So they're all broken down. There's all kinds of rancid oils in there. So I don't want that in my patients during this time. Also, nuts and seeds are like the protein. They're very methionine rich. They can be a little hard on the system. They can be a little hard on the digestive tract. They can be hard on the ileocecal valve. They can be irritating. They can be hard for the liver. So it's just taking it easy on the body. It's just I'm going to make it easy. Most people, walnuts are great for the brain. They're a good essence tonic. Cashews are a little odd because people say that, raw cashews. I mean, you can't eat a cashew raw off the tree. It'll burn your face. You got to roast it first. So the raw ones are just once roasted. The roasted ones are twice roasted, just to be clear. So, it's a toxic thing to start with. So maybe we should, I'm just trying to eliminate problematic things. Does that give you an answer? Cool. So, just look at the berries. Fruits, people say, can I eat fruits? I'm like, just eat all the berries. Just eat the berries. They're so good. They're so rich in the anthocyanins, these flavonoids that protect us. They're low glycemic index. And remember, the glycemic index and the glycemic load are two different things. The load is how much sugar comes onto your bloodstream. How fast is it delivered? Like a carrot itself doesn't have a high load. It doesn't have a high load. It has a high index, meaning there's a lot of sugar in the thing, but it takes a long time for your body to break it down and get the sugar into the bloodstream. So, be aware of the load versus the index for the foods. And that's it. Here you go. Remove the insults. Eat whole foods. Go for bitter. Botanical medicines. Nutrients. Use fasting strategies. Seriously, it's so good. Enhanced elimination. We talked about all the ways to do that. Sleep long and deep. You can't detoxify if you don't sleep. And you think it's hard to go without food? Try going without sleep. I always say, first thing you need is air. The second thing you need is water, and the third thing you need is sleep. The Guinness Book of Records is 11 days without sleep, and that guy is obviously insane. If you guys have seen what it's like, if you've gone 2 nights without sleep, you feel what that feels like, You can go a week without eating. It's not, it's like people do all the time. You can go 40 days without eating, but try to go 40 days without sleep. No way. So you gotta sleep and calm the stress response. Okay, everybody. Thanks.